My tip for drawing this country church is that one of the main things about it are its nice, simple, clean lines. So we want to be careful with our line work, not to do too much too heavily so that the massive lines becomes the immediate thing that we see rather than what the lines are for. It's often a very fine line, keeping our line work in balance with the overall emphasis of our subject. Let's start. I don't normally draw the entire outline of a building as I'm going to do now when I draw, but with this building, because it's a relatively small structure and because it's really the overall shape and proportions of the building, which I think is the most visually dominant feature, I decide that's probably a good way to go. The only real details are the 4 windows down the side and the porch at the front. So I decide to work at establishing the proportions of the main part of the church. So you can see me using my pen to measure the pitch of the roof and trying to position the portico as well. I am already now referencing what I've already drawn, looking at the gap between the lines in the reference and then looking at the gap I will create in my drawing. I'm using the pen to measure angles even for relatively short lines because this angle gives very definite perspective to every horizontal line in the drawing. So there's that line that's under the windows, and I continue to try and work out this porch. The challenge with the porch is that the top of the pitch of the roof in the porch is directly under the center of the pitch of the roof in the main building. So I've got to kind of draw the porch at the same time as I draw the main roof to make sure that they both align properly. That left-hand line of the main roof coming down is probably angled a little too shallow. It probably needs to come down just a fraction more steeply. But hopefully that won't be too obvious, and particularly with the porch in front to kind of attract the eye a bit more. And the roof of this porch comes out further at the top half of it, which was surprisingly tricky to accurately do. It really complicated drawing this front of the porch area. But these are the details that's important to get right. There is some decorative woodwork on the front of the porch, but I decided to leave that for the moment and just to get the main bones of the building in. So I'm trying to work out where this back corner of the main roof goes. Again, you see me using my pen to measure angles, doing some light lines, putting dots, just eyeballing it, and finally actually putting a line in place. Now I work out the halfway point in my reference. You can see I've put a dot on it there, and then the halfway point on my drawing, because with these 4 windows, the biggest challenge will be to actually capture the foreshortening. The fact that they appear to get narrower and closer together the further away from us they go. There's quite a big difference between how the first 2 windows are positioned and the final 2 windows are positioned. And the temptation will be to make all the windows the same size and to spread them evenly along this space. And that will not represent that will fight against the perspective angle of the actual roof and base of the church. Now, I'm not happy with how these windows turned out. I think, made that mistake that I talked about in the introduction, that there's just too much line work for how strongly I want these windows to be seen in relation to the rest of the building. Particularly as I went further along, it was hard to do the same lines without the lines ending up touching each other and therefore becoming one thicker line or one heavy blobby looking effect, particularly with these parts up the top. So that's a problem. I also realized at the end of this that I didn't do any hatching in the lower parts of the windows, which I think would have helped a little bit. So trying to make these windows narrower And as they become narrower and smaller, we do need to try and draw them with a lighter touch anyway. And then squeeze this last one in. It's really important to work hard at foreshortening. I do have a number of videos on that, and including how to work it out exactly if you so want to do in other videos. So I just stick this little bush in down the front to start to remind me that the church sits in a wider context. And I'll add this little extension out the back with the side door and the stairs and the railings. Don't do a great job, but I resist the urge to try and correct it too much because, again, this sits right back in the building and it's not, or it shouldn't be, overly prominent. So I don't want to put too much line work here that will draw attention to something that really shouldn't attract our gaze too much. And so now I come back to the porch, working in the doorway and the hatching for the darkness. It's good at some point to create some of the final details because then we start to get something we can reference for the rest of the details. So I'm finalizing the front of this porch. And although it's not obvious in the photo, there is a mock Gothic style doorway in the front, and it is quite a nice feature of the church. So I put the line work in and make it a little more dominant than it perhaps is in life, just to create a bit more interest in this closest part of the drawing. So I add the corrugations of the corrugated iron roof. Very, very common building material in Australia, even today. And now I'm drawing this timber decoration, not by really drawing the decoration again, but by drawing the shadows, by drawing it through negative space. So now I've got this window above the portico, and the challenge again is that it's centered between the top of the portico and the top of the roof. So I need to hopefully find out that my proportions let me do it at least approximately right. And I draw this window by drawing the shadows, again by drawing negative space, and that lets me do a very light suggestion of the framing around the round window at the very top. And it actually looks a lot nicer than my side windows look. And so I'm thinking, yes, I should have done something more like that for those decorative timber surrounds above the windows. So now I'm just starting to add some of the context of my building. Trees behind it, around it, the grass down the side, the shadows against the brickwork. So I'm using hatching now to show the colour, not shade or shadow, but simply the fact that this is a darker colour. And now I decide to put these trees in and to use them for a couple of reasons. One is it does give a context to the church. It does make it clear that it sits on a lovely leafy block. But perhaps sort of more importantly for my drawing is that it lets me emphasize the church more. By putting darkness behind the church, it pops the church forward, particularly on this left-hand side where the shadows are very dark. But in a moment, I actually increase the tonal effect of the hatching on the right-hand tree, and that does, I think, then push the whole building out closer towards us, which is a nice effect. But now I'm going to put more corrugations on the top of the roof. You can see I place some guidelines because I need to increase the angle as I go from the left to the right side of the roof. And so I often put guidelines to help me do that. Possibly this effect is a bit heavy-handed, but I quite like the way it looks. I really like corrugated roofs, so it's good to show that effect. Just a few final details now. And this is where I darken the tree here to give an overall greater tonal contrast with the roof of the church, particularly now that I've put the corrugation line work on it. And a little detail with a downpipe, and that's it. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting. If you want to have a go drawing this little country church yourself, I've put the photo on my community page, so print off a copy and draw it. But whatever you're drawing, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.